They said no one can own the rain, but Amahle tried, and the river remembered. Amahle was born where the red earth meets the river's shoulder. Her mother sowed fufu flour from a wooden tray, shouting in a voice that made small coins jump into palms. Her father fished with long nets and taught her how to pull the ropes and listen to the river's small talk. They were not poor in the way you see bones and emptiness. They had a roof, a small yard, a pot that needed mending. But they had the kind of living that depends on the weather, and weather is a ruler that answers to no one. By the time Amahle was old enough to run a tray between knees, she had learned something every market woman learns: people will take more if you give them a reason to. She learned how to call, and how to wait. She learned how to watch where the crowd looked, and how to speak like a river. Even when the river was not speaking, her mother would warn her when the moon was thin. "Child," she said, "the river gives and takes. Remember that it remembers." Amahle would laugh and say, "Then I will be the one the river remembers." That is the kind of promise we make when we are young, bold, bright, without counting the cost. One season the clouds left Akres. The sky shut its mouth like a stern elder. The millet cracked in the sun. The yam leaves curled black around their stems. Cattle grew thin. The children's bowls were light as feathers and heavy as worry, the priest sang. The elders beat drums and walked the boundaries. They poured palm wine onto the dry earth and asked the spirits to open the sky. But the sky did not answer. When the river shrunk into a thread, the people learned a new word: patience that becomes fear. Amahle watched the women at the well. She watched hands cup empty palms and look at her with a hunger that turned polite faces into pleading ones. She felt something move inside her, not only hunger for cassava, but hunger that sharpened into an idea. She remembered an old well in the hills, a well her grandmother told about in stories. It was a well that did not dry, they said, because it drank from a hidden seam. Amahle thought, if the sky will not send rain, perhaps the earth will still give. She gathered a few young men, promised them wages she could not yet pay, and they walked into the hills to dig. They dug until the sun had fallen twice. On the second night, a bucket came up heavy with water. Cold, clear, sweet. Amahle brought that water to the market in clay pots. She sold it by the cup, by the pot, by the measure she named fair. People came running. That first week she sold enough to buy the things she had wanted for years. People called her clever. People called her lucky. Amahle called it good business. There was a young fisherman named Kojo who had been a neighbor of Amahle since their childhood. He had hands that remembered how to pull nets in the dark and eyes that learned the river's moods. Kojo was a deep man who spoke less and watched more. He went to the well one evening and found a line of hungry mothers. He stood and watched Amahle turn a face to them. He remembered the time Amahle would sing with them and bargain in jest. He remembered a woman who could be warm and bright like fresh oil. Kojo walked to Amahle's compound and stood outside the gate until she came. He did not call. She stepped down and looked at him under the dying light. Kojo did not tell a story to shame her. He only said a thing that mattered. He said, in a voice like weather, "We grew up with the river. We drank from it as children. It forgets no one. When it returns, it remembers how you treated it." Amahle made no answer that night. She walked back into her house and counted her coins. She told herself that she had built what others could not build. She told herself that she should be the one to keep the water if it meant keeping the people alive. Kojo left with a quiet that would sit between them like a bridge with missing planks. One night, when the moon hung like a coin over the village, an old man with white eyes and a drum like a chest came to Amahle's gate. He sat without asking and began to tap, not a song for celebration, but a rhythm like a sigh. He tapped the drum and did not ask for coin. He tapped and then he spoke, not loudly, but as if he told Amahle what the river already thought: water has no owner and power cannot change that. He pounded a small beat and said simply, "The water remembers. It notes who takes and who does not return. A cup taken without thanks will one day come back as taste of sand. Amahle listened, and like all of us, her heart weighed truth against cost. She took the old man's drumbeat as a tail and the feather he left beside the steps as a curious thing to keep. She put the white feather into a glass jar so it would not break. She liked having objects that reminded her of nights she had survived. That night she dreamed the river wore a cloth of many names. In her dream it whispered the names of those who had thirsted in the night and closed their hands. A truth does not die when we make it uncomfortable. A clerk named Ifedeo worked at Amahle's compound. He had worked for her since she first put a tin roof over the old well. Ifedeo was not a cruel man. He had 2 small children who loved sugar like it was a second religion. He wanted safety. One morning he saw a ledger that did not match what an old man on a cart had brought. The numbers were not the same as the goods. The ledger hid things. Ifedeo's hands trembled. He thought, perhaps it is a mistake. He corrected it at first. But when the second manifest did not match, something larger filled his chest, a feeling like guilt that would not sleep. He took a single piece of paper, folded it small, and carried it to a voice in the capital who told such things without bowing. He left it on the desk of a writer who had lost faith in professions that sold kindness for favor. The story spread like smoke. One paper became a conversation. Conversation became anger. People who once drank quietly began to talk loudly. The chief who had taken a pot stuck it back into the hands of the poor and said he had been wrong. Traders turned their backs without making a scene. Amahle moved as she always moved. She offered apologies that had small gold in them. She claimed miscommunication. She complained that the city journalists did not know what it took to save a village. But trust once bent does not spring straight again. The river does not care which story you tell, it cares about what you do. The people watched. The price Amahle had charged in her head was now a price paid with reputation. The clouds came heavy one month after the story. They gathered like elders in assembly. The people danced and cried because they had not seen such a sky in years. They danced with pots and hands and songs. They thought the debt was finally being repaid, but the sky did not come tender. It opened wide and poured with an anger that had been held. The rain came for 2 nights and then 3. It beat on roofs and filled the fields. The river, swollen and proud, threw itself against the banks. Camps and fences that had once held animals were swept away. Amahle stood on her veranda and watched the water. The clay pots she had stacked like trophies could not hold what the sky delivered. Her house, built strong in the dry, had been made for measured water, not for a river that had remembered a different accounting. Walls softened. The earth gave. The men who had carried her wealth ran to save their families. They did not have the courage to tie their lives to a house that had asked them for their children's futures. The water rose to her knees and then her waist. At the river's edge, Kojo approached in his canoe. He did not call her by name as much as by memory. He pushed the craft up to the bank, stepped lightly, and looked at the house that had been the center of so much life. You can stand at a window and watch the world drown and still not feel the sorrow until it touches your feet. Kojo reached for Amahle not with blame but with an offering, his hand. She reached for it. For a moment the river made a pause and held both of them like a breath, then the current took her. Not in a twist of fate like a dramatic play, but in a slow, terrible slide. Her feet slipped. The water lifted her waist and then her shoulders. The white feather that she had kept in a glass jar floated like a small boat away from the veranda. They found her later by the new shore, her hair clinging to her face, her clothes heavy, her palms empty. The storm had not been only the sky's grief. It had been a settling of the village's balances, a paying of an account called memory. When the sky drew back, the river left a new geography. Where Amahle's pots and walls once stood, there was a lake, broad, calm, and black as a truth. People walked along new shorelines and saw their houses changed. They called the place Amahle's mirror, sometimes, When the moon is full and the night is still, the surface ripples on a face can be seen. It is not only Amahle's face that floats there. It is the reflection of a village whose choices have been measured. After the storm, the people moved. Some took back wells together and agreed on fair shares. Some who had earned coin without giving back now felt awkward carrying their wealth to a place where their neighbors' eyes remembered less forgiving things. Kojo mended his net and cast it again. He did not gloat. He did not become cruel with his luck. He simply fished, and when he drew up a catch he shared it with those who needed it. He had learned that the river has a manner, it expects reciprocity. Amahle's name did not die. Names harden. They last. People told her story like a lesson wrapped in dawn. They took care not to close wells behind iron gates. They left small offerings at the edge of the water. They called the lake a mirror to remind themselves that what you see in the water will stare back at you when you stand before it. Sound, low evening drum, firecrackle returns. This is the part when I ask you to look not only at Amahle but inside. If you hold power that feeds others, how do you keep it? If you gain more than you can share, what kind of person are you becoming? Amahle wanted to survive. She wanted her family never to need. She grew clever and brave. But she also let the measures of safety harden into a habit that forgot faces. Power kept without giving becomes a weight. It attracts hands that want to lift but also hands that will take in the night. Ambition that sells warmth for a price grows a colder heart, and a cold heart cannot hear the soft complaints of its own people. There are no easy endings here. Amahle was not the devil nor the saint. She was a woman who made a choice that many of us could make when the road looks steep and the night looks long. The difference between survival and kindness is the choice we make each day. Kojo kept fishing. The people kept sending the land. The children grew up with the story in their mouths like a proverb. They learned to bring one cup of water to the edge of the field before they took, and to remember who had emptied pots for them in winters long past. When you meet a person who holds the well or commands the market, test them not merely by the gold on their neck, but by the weight of their sharing. When you love, know that there are currencies the world cannot buy: respect, trust, and the simple act of giving without asking for return. And as for Amahle, she taught a village something terrible and something true: what you hold too tightly will turn its edges on you. The river kept its account, and so the rain returned, not as a blessing, but as a reckoning. Where Amahle's mansion once stood, a lake now breathes. When the moon is high, her face still dances beneath the water, not in anger, not in pride, only in memory. The people called it Amahle's mirror. They say the lake remembers those who forget to share, because what the earth gives cannot be owned. The rain does not belong to one roof. Power without kindness is a drought waiting for its flood. So when you drink, pour a little for the ground. When you prosper, leave space for others to breathe. The river keeps accounts. May your accounts be in peace. What lesson did you take from this story? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that reach the soul. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next tale. Bye.